Humans spent literal hundreds of thousands of years just naked. No fur, no clothes, nothing. And then, out of nowhere, we started getting dressed way before we actually needed to. Scientists figured out exactly when using one of the most disgusting research methods in all of anthropology. And I need you to hear this one out. And before you assume this is some simple, it got cold, so we put on a coat story, nope. The actual science here is way weirder than that, and it involves scientists studying literal lice DNA to crack this case. Let's get into how researchers actually figured this out, and why the timeline makes zero sense at first glance. Quick thing before we dive in. If you're new here, we cover ancient history and human origins like this every week. Real research, zero boring textbook energy. Hit follow now so you don't miss the next one. So here's where this whole story starts. And it's a genuinely long runway before clothing even becomes relevant. Scientists estimate humans lost most of their body hair somewhere around 1 million years ago. Remember, this was likely tied to that whole sweating and cooling adaptation that let our ancestors run down prey across hot, open landscapes without overheating. Great system if you're living somewhere warm. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Losing that body hair did not immediately get replaced with clothing, not even close. Based on the genetic evidence, humans spent an absolutely massive stretch of time. We're talking hundreds of thousands of years, completely bare. No fur, no clothes, nothing. Just naked, sweaty, hairless humans wandering around Africa for what was, on a human timescale, an almost incomprehensibly long era. One researcher who worked on this exact question straight up said it's wild to think humans survived for hundreds of thousands of years with neither body hair nor clothing. So if you've ever felt a little exposed without a jacket on a chilly day, just know your ancestors did this for longer than recorded history has even existed, multiplied by several recorded histories. Okay, so at some point humans clearly did start wearing clothes. But here's the actual mystery. There's basically no way to carbon date a piece of ancient fabric because cloth and hide rot away and disappear within a matter of years, not millennia. So how do you figure out when clothing started if the clothing itself is long gone? Scientists found a genuinely brilliant workaround, and it involves something you really don't want crawling on you. So here's the actual genius move researchers made. They realized that human head lice and human body lice, or clothing lice, are technically different, specially adapted versions of essentially the same parasite. Head lice are built to cling to hair. Body lice are built specifically to live and lay eggs in the fibers of clothing, gripping onto fabric instead of hair. Since body lice are so specifically adapted to clothing, researchers led by David Reed at the University of Florida realized something clever. These clothing lice almost certainly couldn't have existed as a separate species until clothing itself existed for them to adapt to. So the team sequenced the DNA of both types of lice to calculate exactly when they genetically split apart from a shared ancestor, essentially using lice evolution as an indirect fossil record for clothing itself, since actual ancient fabric doesn't survive the way Bugs' genetic lineage does. And the results were honestly pretty specific. This analysis dated the split to somewhere around 170,000 years ago, meaning that's roughly when scientists believe clothing first became a regular, established part of human life. It's a genuinely brilliant piece of scientific detective work using the DNA of parasites most people would be horrified to think about for more than 2 seconds. Okay, so clothing shows up around 170,000 years ago. Makes sense, right? Probably got cold. People needed to bundle up. Except here's the part that made researchers do a double take. That timing does not line up with when humans actually needed clothes for the cold. Not even close. So here's the actual plot twist in this whole story. Humans started wearing clothes roughly 170,000 years ago, but they didn't start migrating into the colder climates of Europe and Asia, where you'd actually need clothing to survive, until around 100,000 years ago. That's a genuinely massive gap. Clothing shows up a full 70,000 years before humans were living anywhere that strictly required it for survival. David Reed, the lead researcher on this whole project, said this part surprised him too. He specifically noted it's surprising that modern humans were essentially tinkering with clothing long before they actually needed it just to survive. So if it wasn't purely about staying warm, what was actually going on? Researchers have a few theories, and none of them involve desperate survival necessity. Simple wrapped garments may have started as basic protection from sun exposure, biting insects, and rough terrain while traveling. Others suggest early clothing carried social or decorative meaning way before it carried practical necessity. A way to signal status, identity, or group belonging. Not that different from how clothing still functions today. Either way, the science suggests clothing wasn't a desperate reaction to freezing conditions. It was already an established human habit that later turned out to be an incredibly convenient head start once people actually needed it for a genuinely cold climate. And honestly, this whole story gets one more genuinely weird twist before we wrap up, and it's the kind of detail that scientists still don't have a clean explanation for. So, while researchers were untangling all of this lice evidence, they ran into a genuinely strange, unrelated mystery involving a third type of human louse: pubic lice. When scientists checked the genetic family tree of human pubic lice, they found something nobody was expecting. Their closest genetic relative isn't human head lice or body lice at all. It's gorilla lice. That means, at some point in our evolutionary past, human ancestors and gorillas were close enough, genetically speaking, through some kind of direct or indirect contact, for lice to actually jump species and establish themselves in a completely new host. Scientists genuinely do not have a fully agreed upon explanation for exactly how or why this happened. It remains one of those bizarre little unsolved side mysteries hanging off the edge of an otherwise pretty well documented area of research. So, somewhere in deep evolutionary history, there's an explanation for this that nobody has definitively nailed down yet. And honestly, that might be one of the strangest loose threads in all of human evolutionary biology. So here's the actual takeaway. Clothing wasn't some desperate last minute survival hack invented the moment humans got cold. It was already a normal part of human life for tens of thousands of years before it became a genuine necessity. Meaning, by the time our ancestors actually needed to survive freezing climates in Europe and Asia, they'd already had generations of practice making and refining clothing. That head start, invented for reasons that had nothing to do with survival, ended up being one of the exact tools that let humans successfully spread across nearly the entire planet. And we only know any of this because scientists were resourceful enough to read the story hidden in the DNA of parasites nobody else wanted to look at twice. If nobody taught you the actual research behind this in school, follow. We cover ancient history and human origins like this every single week. Comment what you think early humans were actually using clothing for before they needed it for warmth, because honestly, the theories are wild. And if you want more of this same, wait, science figured this out how energy, check out the Ice Age survival video linked right here. Completely different topic, same kind of unhinged research method.